June 15, 1944. 30,000 feet above the Marianas. A vast silver aircraft glides through the thin stratosphere, sunlight flashing off its aluminum skin like a mirror to the heavens. Below, the Pacific stretches in endless ripples of steel blue, calm, deceptive, eternal. Inside the fuselage, the air is thin and bitterly cold, but the men of the United States Army Air Forces barely feel it. They're cocooned within a pressurized shell, a technological marvel that marks the beginning of a new era in warfare. The machine is the Boeing B-29 Superfortress, the most advanced bomber ever built. Each of its 4 Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines thunders with over 2,200 horsepower, their synchronized drone echoing through the cabin like the heartbeat of a mechanical giant. The Superfortress is a cathedral of riveted steel and innovation, remote-controlled turrets, computerized bomb sights, and a flight ceiling that brushes the edge of heaven itself. Major Robert Bob Kincaid, age 28, sits at the controls, his hands steady on the yoke despite the constant vibration. His oxygen mask fogs slightly as he exhales, eyes flicking between dials and the pale blue horizon. To his right, Captain Harold Lewis, the flight engineer, adjusts the cowl flaps with precise, almost musical movements, as though the massive aircraft were a living instrument, and he its conductor. Behind them, the crew move in quiet coordination. The navigator, hunched over his charts and slide rule, murmurs bearings into the intercom. ETA to Tokyo Bay 9 hours 20 minutes. Course steady. Altitude 30,000. The radio operator fine-tunes frequencies, static hissing like whispers from another world. The gunners peer through their periscopic sights, eyes scanning the endless blue. Every man knows the routine. Every motion is practiced, disciplined, deliberate. The cockpit hums with a strange calm, not silence but a balance of noise and purpose. The air smells faintly of oil, coffee, and ozone. Beyond the plexiglass, the curvature of the earth is just visible, painted in gradients of gold and violet by the setting sun. They are flying higher and faster than any bomber before them, higher than the range of flak guns, faster than most fighters can climb. For the first time in the Pacific War, the United States has the means to reach the Japanese homeland directly, and from this altitude the Pacific looks small. But on the other side of that ocean, inside a dimly lit hangar on Kyushu, a group of Japanese engineers cannot yet imagine what's coming. In the Imperial Japanese Army Air Forces at Tsuji Air Technical Arsenal, the atmosphere is heavy with oil fumes and tension. Lieutenant Colonel Hiroshi Tanaka, a seasoned engineer in his 40s, stands before a chalkboard crowded with equations and rough sketches. Around him, junior officers pore over intercepted Allied intelligence reports describing a mysterious super bomber. Tanaka wipes his hands on a rag, smirking as he reads the specifications aloud. Wingspan, 141 feet. Range, 3,200 miles. Altitude, 30,000 feet. Pressurized cabin, remote turrets for massive engines. He chuckles. Nonsense. It's an American fairy tale. Captain Tetsuo Morita, his assistant, leans over the desk. Sir, if it's true, that would mean they can reach us directly from Saipan. Tanaka waves him off. Even the Americans cannot defy gravity. The Pacific will swallow such a monster before it ever crosses the ocean. Too heavy, too complex. Machines like that belong in laboratories, not battlefields. He is confident, perhaps too confident. Japan's own airframes are pushed to their limits. The Mitsubishi Zero, once the terror of the Pacific, now struggles against faster, tougher American fighters. Engineers like Tanaka have been ordered to design interceptors that can climb higher, fly faster, and meet this so-called super bomber. But for now it feels like an abstract threat, one that exists only on paper. Outside the hangar, the humid summer air vibrates with the roar of engines. Mechanics test run Nakajima Ki-84 Hay-8 fighters, prop wash kicking up dust across the tarmac. The engineers watch through open hangar doors, the sunset glowing on the horizon. To them, the war still feels winnable, a matter of ingenuity and endurance. None of them know that, far above that same sunset, a formation of B-29s is already tracing a line eastward across the Pacific sky. Back aboard the Superfortress, Major Kincaid leans forward, eyes on the glowing edge of the horizon. The intercom crackles softly. Sir, all systems green. We're steady. He nods. Good. Keep it that way. His co-pilot breaks the silence. You really think they'll see us coming? Kincaid's voice is calm, almost detached. They'll see us all right. Just not in time to stop it. The B-29's engines rumble on, echoing across the ocean's vast emptiness. For now, Japan sleeps beneath peaceful skies. Farmers tend their fields. Civilians move through quiet streets, unaware of the storm assembling thousands of miles away. But high above the Pacific, the future is already in motion, a future forged in aluminum, fire, and precision. Soon, the people who once mocked the superfortress's size will look up and see its shadow blot out the sun. And when the first bombs fall over Tokyo, the age of the B-29 will begin. Seattle, Washington. Early 1940. Before it ever thundered above the Pacific, the Boeing B-29 Superfortress existed only as a daring vision, a machine that seemed to defy the physics and logic of its time. The United States was not yet at war, but the Army Air Corps had begun whispering of a need for something beyond imagination, a bomber that could fly faster, higher, and farther than anything built before. In the dim light of Boeing's design lab, engineers in rolled-up sleeves leaned over massive blueprints. At the head of the table stood Eddie Allen, Boeing's chief test pilot and engineer. He was quiet, sharp, meticulous, the kind of man who measured risk in decimals and saw flight as mathematics made tangible. The project was codenamed Model 345, a long-range bomber that could cross oceans and deliver 10 tons of ordnance to a target thousands of miles away, then return safely. It would be unlike anything that had ever taken flight. But there was a problem. Almost every part of it had to be invented from scratch. Its pressurized fuselage, the first ever in a bomber, required engineers to design new welding techniques and new alloys. The remote-controlled gun turrets demanded an analog computer system capable of calculating lead, distance, and altitude automatically. Its engines, the mighty Wright R-3350s, were still in development, plagued by overheating and vibration. The cost, even by wartime standards, was astronomical. By 1942, Congress had poured over $3 billion into the B-29 program, more than the cost of the Manhattan Project itself. Yet despite the strain, Boeing's factories in Wichita, Omaha, and Marietta roared to life. Tens of thousands of workers, men, women, and apprentices barely out of high school, assembled the gleaming frames of a new generation of air power. Sparks flew from welding torches. Rivet guns chattered like machine fire. The war's industrial rhythm pulsed through America's heartland. And in those factories, a sense of awe began to take hold. The B-29 wasn't just a weapon. It was an embodiment of what American industry could achieve under pressure. Each gleaming aircraft that rolled out of the hangar symbolized a quiet defiance, a belief that innovation could outpace fear. First flight, September 21, 1942. Boeing Field, Seattle. The air that morning was cold and sharp, the sky washed in pale autumn light. Engineers, mechanics, and officers lined the tarmac, their breath misting as they watched the silver prototype roll out, its polished fuselage catching the morning sun like a blade. At the controls sat Eddie Allen himself. He'd overseen every calculation, every design compromise, and now he would be the first to test the dream. The engines coughed to life, shaking the ground with low, thunderous growls. The aircraft began to roll. Faster. Faster still. Then, with a steady pull, its massive frame lifted free of the earth, smooth, graceful, impossibly quiet. The crowd erupted in applause. For a moment, it seemed the impossible had become real. But the Superfortress had yet to earn its name. Within months, problems began to emerge. Engines caught fire mid-flight. The complex cooling systems failed without warning. In one catastrophic test, a B-29 prototype exploded over Seattle, killing Eddie Allen and 10 crew members. The tragedy shook Boeing to its core. Newspapers questioned whether the project had gone too far. Critics in Washington called it a flying laboratory, too complex for war. Some military officials argued the Army should cancel the entire program and focus on smaller, proven bombers. But deep in the Pentagon, one man refused to let the project die. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the U.S. Army Air Forces, understood that the B-29 wasn't just another bomber, it was the future of strategic warfare. If it fails, he told his staff, we lose time. If it succeeds, we win the Pacific. Under his direct order, Boeing's engineers worked around the clock. New cooling ducts were designed. Propeller hubs were reinforced. The Wright R-3350 engines were refitted and tested to their limits. Piece by piece, the Superfortress began to earn its reliability, not through luck but through relentless perseverance. By mid-1943, the first production models rolled off the assembly lines. Crews began training at Smoky Hill Army Airfield in Kansas, learning to operate a bomber that felt more like a spaceship than an aircraft. Pressurization meant crews could fly without oxygen masks. Remote gun turrets could be controlled by gunners inside a sealed cabin, using analog computers to track enemy fighters. Even the bombardier's station, fitted with the Norden bomb sight, resembled a command center. For many of the young men who climbed aboard, the B-29 felt like stepping into the future. Across the Pacific, Japanese intelligence began intercepting scattered reports about this mysterious new aircraft. In Tokyo, military planners dismissed them as exaggerated, another boast from an enemy drunk on its own production power. Too big, they said. Too heavy. No machine that large can cross the Pacific with a full bomb load. But the tide of war was shifting. American submarines strangled Japan's shipping lanes. The Imperial Navy was retreating across the Central Pacific. As the Allies seized the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, airfields were already being surveyed, leveled, and built to accommodate the B-29's massive wingspan. Soon, the same silver aircraft that engineers in Tokyo laughed off as impractical would darken the skies above their capital. The machine that had taken 4 years, $3 billion, and countless lives to perfect was finally ready for war. And the world was about to witness what happens when industrial might meets strategic necessity. June 1944. The airfields of Saipan and Tinian bake under the tropical sun. The jungle has been flattened, the coral earth carved into vast runways stretching over a mile long, built for one purpose only, to launch America's most ambitious bomber into the heart of Japan. Construction crews, U.S. Navy Seabees, bulldozer operators and engineers, work day and night, their bodies caked in red dust and sweat. The smell of diesel and wet coral fills the air. Under the constant hum of machinery, one of the most formidable fortresses of air power begins to take shape. The B-29 Superfortress has finally arrived in the Pacific. The first units to operate these aircraft belong to the XXI Bomber Command, commanded by Major General Haywood S. Hansel, a calm, analytical man with a deep belief in precision bombing. His mission is clear: use the B-29's unprecedented range to strike Japan directly, something no other Allied aircraft had ever done. It is a bold plan. From the airfields of Saipan, the distance to Tokyo is nearly 1,500 miles, farther than any bomber crew has ever flown into enemy territory and returned. Every flight will test not only the machine but also the endurance of the men inside it. On the first operational mission, 61 B-29s take off from Isley Field, their 4 engines roaring in unison as they climb above the Pacific. The crews inside are tense. Sweat beads on their foreheads despite the cool air of the pressurized cabin. Each man knows he's part of something historic. The first direct American air assault on Japan since the Doolittle raid in 1942. Inside the cockpit of one aircraft, Dauntless Dottie, flown by Colonel Robert Morgan, the same man who once commanded the famed Memphis Belle, the tone is professional but heavy with anticipation. Morgan checks his instruments. Engine steady. Course locked. Gentlemen, next stop, Tokyo. The crew laughs nervously. Outside the cabin windows, the world below is endless ocean. A vast, indifferent blue stretching toward a land none of them have ever seen. As the bombers reach the Japanese coast, flak bursts bloom in the distance, small black puffs against a sea of white cloud. The formation tightens. Gunners call out bearings, their voices steady through the intercom. Enemy fighters, 2 o'clock high. Visual. Looks like zeros. But as the Japanese interceptors climb, they struggle to reach the B-29's altitude. The Superfortress flies above 30,000 feet, well beyond the effective range of most Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft guns. The enemy's bullets fall short, harmless against the cold air. For the first time, Japan's capital feels the sting of a bomber that cannot be stopped. As the bomb bay doors open, the aircraft trembles. Bombardiers call out the targets: industrial districts, aircraft factories, and rail lines. Then comes the command. Bombs away. Hundreds of 500-pound explosives fall through the clouds, whistling down upon the factories that feed Japan's war machine. Far below, the people of Tokyo look skyward in disbelief. They see silver specks glinting in the sunlight, too high, too fast, too powerful. The explosions roll across the city like thunder. The first B-29 raids have begun. At Japanese air bases, the reaction is swift but uncertain. Major General Hideki Kawabe, a senior officer in Japan's Homeland Air Defense, gathers his subordinates around a map of Honshu. He listens to the reports, the altitude, the range, the bomb load, and then, after a long silence, speaks softly. This is no longer the same war we began. The enemy now strikes from beyond our reach. Engineers from Nakajima and Mitsubishi are called in. They study fragments of downed B-29s and shake their heads in disbelief at the technology, The complexity of the pressurization systems, the range of the radar-controlled gun turrets, the sheer size of the airframe. Lieutenant Colonel Tanaka, the same engineer who once mocked the aircraft as impossible, stares at a twisted section of fuselage recovered from a crash near Niigata. He runs his fingers along the alloy, whispering, "So, it was real." But for the American crews, victory is far from certain. The Pacific weather is merciless. Winds known as the jet stream, a phenomenon then barely understood, tear through formations, scattering bombers and throwing off their aim. Precision bombing becomes nearly impossible. The results of the first raids are disappointing. Many bombs miss their intended targets, falling harmlessly into fields or empty industrial zones. Engines overheat. Crews battle exhaustion and mechanical failure on the long return flights. At the debriefings, tension fills the air. General Hansel still believes in precision, but the results tell another story. The B-29's potential is immense, yet the tactics are flawed. As mission after mission takes place through the latter half of 1944, frustration builds. Crews are lost to accidents and weather more than to enemy action. Tokyo remains scarred but unbroken. Still, something is changing, quietly, inevitably. The B-29s are proving that Japan's home islands are no longer untouchable. For the first time in the war, the Empire's cities lie within range of a sustained air campaign. Soon, a new commander, one with a different philosophy of warfare, will arrive in the Pacific. And with him, the B-29 will be unleashed in a way that no one on Earth is prepared to witness. January 1945. The Pacific night is thick with mist as the lights of Guam's North Field flicker across the runway. Mechanics swarm under floodlights, wrenches clanking, voices muffled under the drone of idling engines. The air smells of kerosene and ocean salt. At the edge of the airstrip, a column of silver bombers waits, 70 tons of steel and fire, lined up like sleeping giants. Their wings glint faintly in the humid dark. Each one bears the same unmistakable shape: the bulbous nose, the long fuselage, the wide wings of the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. A jeep screeches to a halt beside the command tent. Out steps a broad-shouldered man with a square jaw and the expression of someone who never blinks. Major General Curtis E. LeMay. He's 38 years old, but the strain of command has carved deep lines into his face. LeMay is not a man of charm, he's a man of results. Gruff, uncompromising, and relentlessly logical, he's been brought to the Pacific to fix a campaign that's faltering. The B-29 has proven its power, but not its purpose. Precision raids on industrial plants haven't broken Japan's production. The winds, the clouds, and the distances have robbed the Superfortress of accuracy. General Hansel's vision of high-altitude, daylight precision bombing is failing. LeMay studies the mission reports, his jaw tightening. "We're doing this all wrong," he mutters. "We're fighting weather, not the enemy." When he takes command of the XXI Bomber Command in January 1945, LeMay brings with him a ruthless clarity. If the B-29's altitude advantage can't guarantee accuracy, then the solution isn't to climb higher, it's to go lower. Within weeks he orders a radical change. The new plan, low-altitude night raids, using incendiary bombs instead of high explosives. The targets are no longer specific factories, they're entire urban districts. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, cities built largely from wood and paper. It is a decision that will forever alter the course of the air war, and the lives of millions. Under LeMay's direction, engineers modify the bombers for the new missions. Armor plating and heavy defensive guns are stripped out to lighten the load. Instead of precision bombs, the crews load stacks of M69 incendiaries, napalm-filled canisters designed to ignite on impact and spread liquid fire. Each B-29 will now carry nearly 7 tons of these devices. The crews are uneasy. The idea of flying massive bombers at low altitude, just 5,000 to 8,000 feet, over heavily defended Japanese cities sounds suicidal. But LeMay is firm. He gathers the squadron leaders in a briefing tent, the air thick with smoke and tension. He paces slowly, then stops, hands behind his back. "We've been dropping bombs on factories," he says. "But the truth is, Japan's war industry lives in the homes of its workers. You destroy the homes, you destroy the war." No one speaks. The room is silent except for the rustle of maps. LeMay stares at his officers, then adds, "We're not going to win this war by half measures. We'll burn out the heart of the empire if that's what it takes." March 9, 1945. Operation Meeting House, the firebombing of Tokyo. Just after midnight, 334 B-29s rise into the humid sky from bases in the Marianas. Their bomb bays are filled with over 1,600 tons of incendiaries. The moonlight gleams faintly on their wings as they head north over the Pacific. Inside each superfortress, the tension is unbearable. Sweat drips from under helmets. The smell of oil and metal fills the cabin. Radio chatter crackles across the intercom, call signs, altitudes, bearings. As the first formations cross the Japanese coast, radar operators on the ground begin to panic. The blips are too many to count. Tokyo's air defenses come alive, searchlights cut across the sky, flak bursts bloom like black flowers. But the bombers keep coming. At 12:08 a.m., the first incendiaries fall. They hit the Shitamachi district, one of Tokyo's most densely populated neighborhoods. The first fires spread fast, too fast. Within minutes, the dry wooden buildings ignite like kindling. By 12:30, the city is an inferno. The heat rises in waves, forming firestorms that melt asphalt and tear roofs from buildings. Entire blocks vanish in sheets of flame. Civilians run through the streets, clutching children and possessions, but there is nowhere to go. The fire moves faster than they can run. From above, the bomber crews can see the devastation even through the smoke. The glow is so bright it reflects off the bellies of their aircraft. Radio operators whisper, "God Almighty?" But there is no stopping now. Wave after wave of B-29s unload their cargoes, layering new ribbons of fire over the ruins of the old. By dawn, 16 square miles of Tokyo lie in ashes. Over 100,000 people are dead. It is the most destructive air raid in human history. When the crews return to Guam, the base is silent. The men climb out of their planes, dazed and exhausted. Some are sickened by what they've witnessed. Others are grimly satisfied. LeMay listens to the mission report without expression. Then he simply says, "Good. Now we know what works." Over the next weeks, the firebombing continues. Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe. One by one, Japan's cities vanish under rolling waves of flame. The B-29, once seen as a symbol of precision and progress, has become an instrument of apocalypse. And though the Japanese engineers who once laughed at its design now understand its power, they can do nothing to stop it. The war has entered its most brutal phase. But the superfortress still has one mission left, one that will make its name immortal. By the spring of 1945, Japan is a country on fire. From Tokyo to Kobe, the nights are lit by orange flames that claw at the sky. Smoke hangs over the cities like a shroud. Railway lines twist in the heat, ships sink smoldering in the harbors, and millions of civilians wander through ruins that were once neighborhoods. The B-29 Superfortress, once mocked as too large and complex to matter, has become the architect of Japan's ruin. And yet, Japan does not surrender. Even as American bombers turn cities to ashes, the Japanese military clings to hope. High command believes that if they can inflict enough casualties when the United States invades the home islands, perhaps Washington will offer peace terms short of unconditional surrender. But in Washington and on the island of Guam, a different conversation is taking place. In the war rooms of the U.S. Army Air Forces, maps of Japan cover the walls. Red pins mark destroyed cities, blue ones mark those still standing. Of the 66 largest urban areas in Japan, 58 have already been heavily bombed. General Curtis LeMay sits at the head of the table, cigar smoke curling upward in the dim light. He reviews the data, fuel consumption, bombing accuracy, city damage assessments. His raids have devastated Japan's infrastructure, but not its will. Then a quiet knock at the door. An officer enters, carrying a single folder marked Manhattan Engineer District. LeMay looks up as the man places the file on the table. Inside are photographs, formulas, and a short, chilling phrase. One bomb. One city. The era of conventional warfare is about to end. In Los Alamos, New Mexico, a different kind of army has been at war. Physicists, engineers, and mathematicians led by J. Robert Oppenheimer. After years of secret work, they have created two weapons beyond comprehension: Little Boy, a uranium bomb, and Fat Man, a plutonium bomb. Both are designed to be delivered by a single aircraft, the only one large enough, stable enough, and long-range enough to carry them, the B-29 Superfortress. So begins the creation of a new unit, the 509th Composite Group, commanded by Colonel Paul W. Tibbets, a hard-edged, methodical pilot with years of experience flying B-17s and B-29s. His orders are clear and secret: train for a special mission that could end the war. At Wendover Army Airfield in Utah, the 509th begins preparing. Their B-29s are modified, stripped of unnecessary armor, fitted with new bomb racks, and equipped with advanced flight controls for extreme precision. Each one bears a name painted by the crews who will fly them. The most famous among them, Enola Gay. In July 1945, as final preparations begin, President Harry S. Truman travels to Potsdam, Germany. There, alongside Churchill and Stalin, he issues an ultimatum to Japan. Surrender unconditionally or face prompt and utter destruction. The Japanese government refuses. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki responds with a single word, mokusatsu, meaning, to ignore. Truman reads the message and makes his decision. The atomic bomb will be used. August 5, 1945. Tinian Island. The night is calm, the sea whispering against the coral reefs. Under floodlights, the Enola Gay is prepared for its mission. The bomb bay doors are open. Ground crews move with silent precision, guiding a massive 10,000-pound weapon suspended by cables, the world's first atomic bomb ready for combat. At 2:45 a.m., Colonel Paul Tibbets climbs into the cockpit. His crew, 12 men, take their stations. The engines roar to life, shaking the tropical air. A few minutes later, the Enola Gay begins rolling down the runway, gaining speed, heavy with the weight of history. She lifts into the night sky, bound for Hiroshima, a city untouched by previous bombing raids, chosen specifically to measure the full effect of this new weapon. The crew flies in silence. The only sound is the steady hum of the engines and the rhythmic ticking of the instruments. At 31,000 feet, the sun begins to rise over the Pacific, casting the silver aircraft in golden light. At 8:15 a.m. Japanese time, Bombardier Thomas Farragut peers through the northern sight. The target drifts into the crosshairs, the Aioi Bridge, near the center of Hiroshima. Bomb away. The Enola Gay jolts slightly as the weapon drops. A dull thud echoes through the fuselage. 43 seconds later, the sky ignites. The blast consumes the city in an instant, a blinding white flash followed by a roar that shatters glass 30 miles away. The fireball expands, swallowing the skyline. A shockwave ripples through the mountains, followed by a column of smoke rising over 60,000 feet. The crew of the Enola Gay circles in stunned silence. Farragut shields his eyes as the mushroom cloud blooms beneath them. Co-pilot Captain Robert Lewis writes in his logbook, "My God, what have we done?" The bomb destroys over 70% of Hiroshima, killing an estimated 80,000 people instantly, with tens of thousands more dying in the following days. Back on Tinian, when Tibbets lands, he's greeted by applause and reporters. He salutes, but his eyes are distant. The mission has succeeded. The world has changed forever. 3 days later, another B-29 boxcar, commanded by Major Charles Sweeney, will fly over Nagasaki, carrying the second atomic bomb. When it falls, the empire of Japan will finally begin to crumble. The machine that Japan's engineers once called impossible has become the instrument of their surrender. August 9, 1945. 3 days after Hiroshima vanished in a blinding flash, the island of Tinian awakens again to the same ritual. Another dawn, another bomber, another mission cloaked in secrecy. On the runway, the B-29 boxcar idles in the tropical heat. Its engines rumble, the propellers carving rhythmic spirals through the humid air. Ground crews move deliberately around the plane, their faces drawn and pale. The bomb, codenamed Fat Man, rests inside the open bomb bay. Unlike the uranium weapon dropped on Hiroshima, Fat Man uses plutonium, a design far more complex but also far more powerful. It is an experiment, one that no one on the planet yet fully understands. At 3:47 a.m., Major Charles W. Sweeney climbs aboard. His co-pilot, Captain Fred Bach, for whom the plane is named, watches quietly from the tarmac. The crew straps in, checks their oxygen systems, their instruments, their hearts. Sweeney glances at his navigator, Captain Kermit Behan, and gives the nod. "Let's finish this." The boxcar lurches forward, gathering speed down the coral runway. The engines howl as it lifts into the darkness, bound first for Kokura, then, if weather forbids, the secondary target, Nagasaki. In the air, the mission begins to unravel almost immediately. One of the boxcar's fuel transfer pumps fails, trapping nearly 600 gallons of gasoline in an auxiliary tank. Its dead weight, enough to cripple their return trip. Still, Sweeney presses on. He knows what he carries. As they approach Kokura, the city lies hidden beneath thick clouds. Smoke from a previous raid drifts in from nearby Yaata, blanketing the streets below. The bombardier peers through the northern sight, searching for the target, the Arsenal district. "Can't see it," Behan calls out. Cloud covers at 90%. Sweeney circles once, twice, 3 times. Each pass burns precious fuel. Japanese anti-aircraft guns open up, bursts of black flak rising toward them. They can't wait any longer. Sweeney turns to his crew. We're moving to the secondary. The words fall heavy in the cabin. They bank southwest, heading for Nagasaki. At 11:01 a.m., after a harrowing approach through heavy clouds, the city finally appears below, a brief clearing revealing the Urakami Valley. Behan seizes the opportunity. Target in sight. Ready? The bomb bay doors open. A deep metallic clunk reverberates through the fuselage. The crew holds their breath. Bomb away. Sweeney immediately banks hard to the right, diving for distance. 43 seconds later, the second atomic bomb detonates over Nagasaki with a blinding flash. The sky itself seems to rip apart. The explosion releases energy equivalent to 21,000 tons of TNT. The shockwave obliterates everything within a mile radius. Concrete buildings crumble like paper, bridges snap in half, the river beneath boils away in seconds. The heat, over 3,900 degrees Celsius, incinerates those below before they can even register the sound. A monstrous mushroom cloud climbs into the sky, twisting with ash and fire. From 20 miles away, fishermen on the coast watch the rising column and wonder if the mountain itself has exploded. Inside the boxcar, the men are silent. None speak as the instruments flicker and the shockwave rocks the bomber like a leaf in a storm. Behan breaks the silence, his voice faint. That's the damnedest thing I ever saw. Back on Tinian, when the boxcar lands hours later, the airfield is hushed. The crew climbs out, pale and exhausted. Their faces show no triumph, only the dazed stillness of men who have seen the unimaginable. Reports begin to flow in from reconnaissance aircraft. Nagasaki is gone. An estimated 70,000 people are dead. Thousands more will perish in the coming weeks from burns and radiation. In Tokyo, the news reaches Emperor Hirohito. He listens silently as his ministers argue. The military insists on fighting to the last soldier. Others plead for surrender. But when the emperor hears the words single bomb, entire city destroyed, he makes his decision. For the first time in history, the divine ruler of Japan will speak to his people. August 15, 1945. Tokyo. The imperial palace is still, its halls lined with officers and ministers. In a small recording room, Hirohito stands before a microphone, his voice calm, almost ethereal. He speaks not of defeat but of endurance, of the need to bear the unbearable. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage, and we have resolved to pave the way for a grand peace. Across the empire, radios crackle with his voice. Soldiers in foxholes, mothers in shattered homes, factory workers in the ruins, they all hear the same thing. The emperor has spoken. The war is over. On Tinian, the crews of the 509th Composite Group gather by their aircraft. The once bustling airfield is eerily quiet. Some men celebrate. Others sit alone, staring at the horizon. Colonel Paul Tibbets stands beside the Enola Gay, its silver skin now dulled by salt and sunlight. He's congratulated, photographed, and saluted. But when asked how he feels, he gives a short, tired answer. We did our job. Far across the ocean in Tokyo, Lieutenant Colonel Tanaka, the same engineer who once laughed at the idea of the Superfortress, stands among the ashes of a burned-out factory. The sky above him is empty now, no contrails, no bombers, just the faint smell of smoke. He whispers almost to himself. It was never about size. It was about reach. The B-29 Superfortress, once doubted and ridiculed, has changed the world. It ended one war, and began another, the Cold War, where the sky would forever be watched and the shadow of atomic fire would never fade. The laughter of those who once mocked it is long gone, replaced by the silence of surrender, and the haunting truth that progress and destruction are sometimes the same invention. August 1945. Japan. The empire that once stretched from the jungles of Burma to the islands of the Central Pacific now lies in ruins. From the air, the cities appear as blackened grids, silent graveyards of ash and twisted metal. The sound of war has faded, but its echo lingers in every smoldering ruin, every empty field. The once mighty imperial army is broken. Its ships lie rusting in their harbors. Its cities, Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, are shadows of themselves. The B-29 Superfortress had done what no weapon in history had ever achieved. It had made an island nation feel small. In the weeks following Japan's surrender, American reconnaissance aircraft sweep across the country, cameras mounted beneath their bellies capturing images of devastation. Bridges warped by heat. Rivers choked with rubble. Entire neighborhoods reduced to patterns of ash. outlines where homes once stood. General Curtis LeMay, now overseeing the final phase of the air campaign, reviews the photographs from his temporary headquarters on Guam. The images are clinical, detached, just black and white prints on a wooden desk. He studies them quietly, cigar smoke curling upward in the dim light. When an aide remarks, "Sir, we've burned out most of Japan," LeMay exhales slowly and replies, "Then maybe they'll never want to start another war." His words are not cruel, just weary. The fire raids had broken Japan's will, but at a cost even he struggled to comprehend. In Tokyo, the survivors move through ruins that still radiate heat. The once bustling Asakusa district is nothing but charred beams and cracked stone. A mother kneels beside a shallow ditch filled with water, washing the soot from her child's face. Nearby, soldiers sweep rubble from the palace grounds, their movements slow and mechanical. The smell of burned paper, wood, and flesh hangs in the air, refusing to fade. At a small Shinto shrine, a priest rings a bell and prays over an empty courtyard. He looks to the sky, where the contrails of bombers once traced white scars, and murmurs, "May the sky be silent forever." Half a world away, the men who flew those missions return home. For many, the transition from war to peace is anything but simple. Major Robert Kincaid, who had flown early raids over Tokyo, writes in his journal from his family farm in Kansas, "We flew so high we couldn't see their faces. Maybe that's how we lived with it. But I still dream about the glow, the kind of light that shouldn't exist on Earth." In the towns of America, parades roll through streets lined with flags. Veterans march proudly, bands play, and banners declare victory. Yet behind the applause there's unease, a quiet understanding that the war ended not with surrender alone, but with something far more permanent, the dawn of atomic fear. The B-29 Superfortress had not only ended a war. It had introduced a weapon that could end the world. At Los Alamos, Oppenheimer receives word of Hiroshima's destruction. The scientists gather in stunned silence. Some cheer. Others weep. Oppenheimer himself simply quotes a line from the Bhagavad Gita. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." It is not triumph, it is revelation. The weapon they had built for necessity has revealed humanity's new reality. Total annihilation is now possible. The B-29 was the messenger. The world would never look at the sky the same way again. In Japan, the occupation begins. General Douglas MacArthur arrives in Tokyo in early September, stepping off his transport at Atsugi Airfield. His arrival marks not just the end of one war, but the beginning of a reconstruction, an effort to rebuild a nation from the ashes. American troops walk through devastated cities, handing out food and medicine to starving civilians. Engineers rebuild bridges. Soldiers distribute blankets to children who have lost everything. The conquerors become caretakers. And hovering above all of it, parked at airfields and lined in perfect rows, the B-29s remain, their massive wings stretching across the horizon. They are not symbols of destruction now, but of deterrence. Silent guardians of a peace no one dares to disturb. In one small factory in Nagoya, where once Japanese engineers built the Nakajima fighters that challenged the skies, a handful of surviving workers return. Among them is Lieutenant Colonel Hiroshi Tanaka, the engineer who once mocked the B-29. His tools are gone. His machines are melted ruins. But as he looks across the gutted hangar, he sees something he never noticed before. A single charred piece of aircraft fuselage, its aluminum warped but intact. It bears the faint outline of English letters, U.S. Army Air Forces. He kneels beside it, running his hand over the metal, and whispers to himself, "It wasn't the machine that defeated us. It was the mind that built it." Tanaka would later become part of Japan's post-war industrial rebirth, contributing to the early foundations of its peacetime aviation industry, a quiet irony in a world rebuilt by those who once destroyed it. By 1946, most of the B-29s are retired, parked in rows under the desert sun of the American Southwest. Their engines, once the heartbeat of victory, now rest silent. Some will be scrapped, others stored, a few preserved for museums. But for the men who flew them, and for those who lived beneath their shadows, the sound of those engines will never fade. Because the B-29 did more than change the outcome of World War II. It changed what war was. From that moment on, every nation would look upward and remember. Power had found its wings. The war had ended, but the story of the Boeing B-29 Superfortress was far from over. Its shadow stretched beyond 1945, into the Cold War, into the jet age, into the collective memory of nations. What began as a radical, almost impossible engineering dream became the aircraft that redefined warfare itself. It wasn't just a bomber. It was the machine that made the sky an empire. In the months after Japan's surrender, the world's military minds rushed to study what the B-29 had accomplished. In Britain, engineers at Avro and Handley Page examined its pressurization systems and defensive turrets, realizing they were years behind. In the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin gave a simple, chilling order after 3 American B-29s made emergency landings in Soviet territory during the war. Copy it. Exactly. Within a few years, the Tupolev Tu-4, a near-perfect clone of the B-29, took to the skies, down to the rivet count and even the English markings painted on its components. The Soviet Union now possessed its own superfortress. It was the dawn of a new age, the nuclear standoff. But the original superfortresses were not done flying. From 1946 through the early 1950s, they became the backbone of the newly formed U.S. Strategic Air Command, SAC. They carried not conventional bombs but the earliest atomic weapons, bulky, unpredictable, and deadly. In hangars at Roswell Army Airfield, ground crews worked under armed guard, loading bombs with great care while technicians in white coats calibrated timing devices that could erase entire cities. These bombers now flew under a different kind of mission. No longer about victory, but about deterrence. Each takeoff was a message: we can strike anywhere. In the skies over Korea, the B-29 would again prove its worth, but also reveal its age. When war broke out in 1950, the superfortress returned to battle. It bombed North Korean supply lines, bridges, and factories. But this time the enemy had something new: MiG-15 jet fighters, faster and deadlier than any piston-engine aircraft. For the first time, the B-29 was hunted. Crews found themselves flying through flak and jet interceptors, losing planes in daylight raids. To survive, they reverted to night missions, silent runs through darkness, guided by radar. Still, the superfortress held its ground. It wasn't just a machine, it was a symbol. A relic of a brutal past, still capable of reshaping the present. Meanwhile, back in Japan, the transformation was remarkable. In Tokyo, factories once dedicated to building bombers and fighters were now producing automobiles, radios, and machinery for peaceful industries. American engineers helped rebuild the infrastructure they once destroyed, and former enemies worked side by side. The irony was not lost on anyone, least of all on those who had witnessed the bombings firsthand. In Hiroshima, a young boy named Akira Ono, who had survived the inferno as a child, later became an aeronautical engineer. Decades later, when interviewed, he said, "I hated the B-29. But it also showed me what human hands can make. I decided I would build things that fly but never again for killing." His words captured a new spirit, one born from ashes, driven by reflection rather than revenge. By the mid-1950s, the B-29 was replaced by newer, faster bombers. The B-50, then the B-47 Stratojet, and eventually the mighty B-52 Stratofortress, whose lineage could be traced directly to the B-29's design. But even as it aged, the superfortress remained in service with air forces around the world. It trained crews, carried out reconnaissance missions, and even performed weather reconnaissance during nuclear tests in the Pacific. Its robust frame, enormous range, and pressurized cabins made it adaptable, the mark of a truly visionary design. And yet, behind every flight, every mission log, there lingered a question that haunted many of the men who had flown them. Had the B-29 ended war, or simply changed its shape? In post-war America, citizens lived under the constant shadow of the bomb, duck and cover drills in schools, fallout shelters in basements, air raid sirens tested monthly. The same aircraft that had secured victory had also introduced a permanent sense of vulnerability. Every booming jet overhead reminded the world of what the superfortress had started. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force, a single aircraft still stands gleaming beneath the lights, the Enola Gay. Its polished aluminum skin reflects the faces of visitors, some awed, others uneasy. Children stare at its massive wingspan, listening as their parents read the small inscription beside it. This aircraft dropped the first atomic bomb used in warfare. Nearby, veterans stand quietly, hats in hand. One of them, a frail man in his 90s, whispers to his grandson, "We thought it would end all wars. Maybe it just ended the old kind." The boy looks up at the plane, not understanding the weight of those words. Not yet. Today, the B-29 Superfortress exists in memory as both marvel and warning. It represents humanity's boundless ambition, and its terrible potential. The engineers who built it, the crews who flew it, and the people who lived beneath it all became part of a story that transcends victory and defeat. A story about invention, about power, about consequence. Because when the B-29 first appeared over Tokyo, it didn't just signal the end of an empire. It marked the beginning of a new world, one where the sky would forever hold both hope and fear. Amid the grand arcs of history, it is the personal stories that breathe life into the legend of the B-29 Superfortress. For every mission log and technical diagram, there were human beings, young men in the cockpit, on the gunner stations, in the belly of the plane, who lived, feared, and sometimes died alongside this enormous machine. In the hangars of the 58th Bombardment Wing, airmen worked tirelessly to prepare their superfortresses for another night raid over the Japanese mainland. Captain Robert "Bob" Jackson, a 24-year-old pilot from Kansas, inspected the aircraft with a meticulous eye, tapping rivets, checking hydraulics, and ensuring the pressurization system functioned at over 30,000 feet. Every time we climbed above 28,000 feet, it felt like stepping into another world, Jackson later recounted. The air was thin, the engine screamed, and every creak of the plane reminded you it was alive, almost like it had its own heartbeat. In the cockpit, the navigation officer, Lieutenant Kenji Tanaka, often squinted at the charts and instruments, his fingers tracing the course from Guam to Tokyo. Despite the technical brilliance of the Superfortress, nothing could prepare them for the psychological weight of flying over enemy cities. Below deck, the gunners were a different breed of warrior. The tail gunner, perched like a sentinel in the extreme rear of the aircraft, had a panoramic view of the night sky. Sergeant James "Jimmy" Caldwell, from Ohio, manned the .50 caliber twin mounts with a mixture of boredom and hypervigilance. You spend hours staring into nothing, then suddenly tracer fire lights up the sky, he remembered. You hope you're the one shooting, not being shot at. The plane shakes, but it keeps going. That's the B-29, stubborn as hell. Crew camaraderie became the glue that held these young men together. They shared letters from home, cigarettes, canned peaches, and quiet jokes. In the freezing upper atmosphere, humor became a survival tool. We called her the Silver Ghost, one engineer said of his bomber. Not because she was invisible, God, she was huge, but because once she got airborne, nothing stopped her. Meanwhile, Japanese civilians faced a terror entirely beyond their imagination. In downtown Tokyo, Mrs. Haruko Matsui, a schoolteacher, remembered the first raid vividly. I woke to a strange humming sound. It was not a plane, it was a fleet of them. They were so high that we could barely see them, yet their bombs made the city tremble. Families huddled in makeshift shelters. Streets were empty except for those brave, or desperate, enough to check on neighbors. The psychological effect was as profound as the physical destruction. People realized these aircraft could strike anywhere, anytime, and nothing in Japan could counter them effectively. Yet, amidst the fear, there were acts of unexpected humanity. One bomber crew returning from a Tokyo raid spotted a child waving from a shattered rooftop. Sergeant Caldwell later recounted how the gunners paused for a moment, lowering their weapons, offering silent recognition to the fragility of life amidst the chaos they had helped create. For many airmen, the war was a collision of duty and conscience. They were trained to follow orders, to trust technology, and to believe in the strategic necessity of the raids. Yet the faces below, fleeing, terrified, desperate, reminded them that their machine, the mighty B-29, carried immense power and consequences. Not all missions ended in heroism or survival. Engine failures at extreme altitude were terrifyingly common. Oxygen deprivation could render crews unconscious in seconds. Flak could tear through aluminum skin. Mechanical malfunctions forced pilots to make split-second decisions over enemy territory. Countless logs detail planes limping home, riddled with holes, while some never returned at all. The B-29 was a marvel, yes, but it demanded respect. Every bolt, every rivet, every engine's roar was a reminder that this was a war machine, not a toy. Amid this high-stakes drama, some crews found moments of beauty. Above the clouds, the sun would set in blazing hues, illuminating frost-covered wings. Contrails stretched endlessly behind the aircraft, like silver ribbons across the sky. In those rare, quiet moments, pilots like Captain Jackson would whisper to themselves, "For all the destruction it brings, it's also magnificent." You feel like you're flying a cathedral made of steel. These moments did not erase the horror, but they grounded the men, offering glimpses of awe, even in a world at war. As the Superfortress carried on, these personal stories, of courage, fear, and human complexity, became inseparable from the legacy of the aircraft. It was no longer just a bomber, it was a vessel of human experience, a machine whose steel bones carried the weight of history itself. November 24, 1944. 31,000 feet above Tokyo. The city sprawled beneath a cold, silver moon, its streets and rooftops cloaked in shadows. From this altitude, Tokyo appeared almost peaceful, a delicate network of lights and darkened alleys, entirely unaware of the leviathans gliding silently overhead. Inside B-29, Enola Gay, not yet famed by history, but one of many superfortresses on this mission. Captain Robert Jackson adjusted the autopilot and squinted through his oxygen mask at the distant horizon. The high-altitude winds buffeted the aircraft, rattling loose panels, but the superfortress held steady, like a floating fortress of steel and resolve. Below deck, the bombardier, Lieutenant Charles "Charlie" Morrison, consulted his Norden bomb sight, the device so precise that it was said to bring industrial Tokyo within inches of its intended target. Morrison's hands were steady but his mind raced. This was no ordinary strike. It was a message. Japan's cities, once thought invulnerable, were within the reach of American industry and ingenuity. You could see the whole city stretching to the horizon, Morrison later recounted. And you thought, this is it. This is the war coming home to them. The machine did its work, but the men had to make the decisions. Below, Japanese air defenses scrambled in confusion and desperation. The Imperial Japanese Army Air Service had long mocked the B-29 as cumbersome, too heavy, and incapable of sustained operations over Japan. They had faced fighters and medium bombers before, but nothing of this scale and precision. Anti-aircraft guns fired into the night sky, flak bursts blooming like deadly flowers, yet most detonated harmlessly far below the bomber's altitude. Japanese commanders, including Lieutenant General Masaharu Homa, watched radar and visual reports with disbelief. These machines, they float above our defenses, Homa reportedly said. It is as if they are untouchable. How can a single aircraft carry such destruction? The answer was in engineering brilliance, strategic foresight, and sheer audacity. The B-29's pressurized cabin allowed crews to survive at altitudes where Japanese fighters could not operate effectively. Its long-range capability enabled direct attacks from bases in the Mariana Islands, circumventing Japan's outer defenses. Its payload, the heaviest of any bomber at the time, ensured maximum destruction with every sortie. Over Tokyo, the superfortresses released their bombs with surgical precision. From above, the city erupted in controlled chaos. Buildings that once symbolized prosperity and culture crumbled under the meticulously calculated strikes. Firestorms erupted in narrow alleys and open districts alike, smoke spiraling high into the cold night air. From the bomb bay, Morrison watched the incendiaries fall and felt a chill, the paradox of duty and morality pressing against his chest. On the ground, Japanese civilians fled blindly, mothers clutching children, shopkeepers abandoning their stalls, and the elderly stumbling in fear. The psychological shock was profound. The city they had assumed untouchable was now a battlefield. The engineers who had once scoffed at the B-29's design now faced the grim reality. Their calculations, their mockery, were meaningless against the machine in the sky. It was not just the bombs, one officer later recalled. It was the fact of their appearance. The B-29 hovering over Tokyo, like an omen. They could strike anywhere, anytime. That shattered our confidence as much as our buildings. In the air, the superfortresses returned to formation, engines humming, wings glinting faintly in the moonlight. Crews exchanged glances, a mix of exhaustion and quiet pride. The city below was scarred, but the mission had succeeded. The era of strategic high-altitude bombing over Japan had arrived, and nothing could deny the implications. Captain Jackson, staring at the retreating horizon, reflected on the paradox of war. The same machine that inspired awe and fear above Tokyo had also demanded immense sacrifice from its crews. Each flight carried the weight of lives, both American and Japanese, and the knowledge that history was being rewritten in steel and fire. As the B-29s turned for home, the Japanese High Command convened emergency meetings, re-evaluating tactics and acknowledging a chilling new reality. The superfortress was not just another bomber. It was a symbol of a devastating new age of warfare, precise, relentless, and almost untouchable. In that moment, the world witnessed the future of aerial combat. The B-29's dominance over Japan would not only shape the final year of the Pacific War but redefine the possibilities of air power for decades to come. Engineers, soldiers, and civilians alike would remember the night the skies over Tokyo were ruled by the Silver Ghosts, machines so vast and precise that skepticism melted into awe and fear. The era had changed. March 9, 1945. Tokyo, Japan. The city had changed beyond recognition. Smoke still curled from pockets of destruction, and the streets, once teeming with life, bore the eerie silence of shock and survival. From the air, the damage was staggering. Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble, firestorms marking the scale of destruction. Yet for the B-29 crews, this was only the beginning of a campaign that would define the endgame of the Pacific War. In the Mariana Islands, bases such as Saipan and Tinian buzzed with preparation. Ground crews worked tirelessly beneath the tropical sun, refueling, repairing, and arming the superfortresses for their next sortie. Mechanics like Sergeant Paul Hernandez labored on engines that, to outsiders, seemed impossibly complex. Each bolt tightened, each wire secured, ensured that the massive aircraft could rise above Japanese defenses again. Hernandez, a veteran of countless missions, often remarked, "The B-29 isn't just metal. It's every hand that worked on it, every mind that designed it. And up there, every one of us has to be perfect, because mistakes aren't forgiven at 30,000 feet." Back in Japan, the initial disbelief at the B-29's capability had evolved into strategic anxiety. Commanders scrambled to develop new defensive measures, high-speed interceptor squadrons, anti-aircraft gun networks, and even experimental night fighter programs. But the advantages of altitude, range, and payload rendered many efforts futile. For the first time, Japan faced a persistent threat from above that could not be entirely countered by sheer bravery or ingenuity. Japanese engineers who once ridiculed the B-29's size and complexity were forced to reconsider their assumptions. Reports circulated within the Imperial Army and Navy describing the bomber's technical sophistication: pressurized cabins, remote-controlled defensive turrets, and advanced navigation systems that allowed precise strikes across hundreds of miles. The very design they had dismissed became a case study in innovation that was years ahead of anything they had in service. "We thought it was just another heavy bomber," wrote Major Takashi Nakamura in his personal diary. But the sight of them overhead, night after night, told a different story. "We were unprepared for the scale, the precision, the relentlessness. It was the future arriving in our skies." For the American crews, the B-29 represented both technological triumph and a moral burden. Missions demanded careful planning, coordination, and endurance. Pilots, navigators, and bombardiers worked in near-perfect synchronization, maintaining altitudes where oxygen was essential and errors could be fatal. The sheer size of the aircraft meant that each mission carried unprecedented risk. One mistake, one mechanical failure, could lead to catastrophic loss. Yet despite these dangers, the crews developed a deep respect for the aircraft. It was simultaneously their weapon, their shield, and their home. By mid-1945, B-29 raids had become a cornerstone of the U.S. strategy in the Pacific. Entire campaigns, from incendiary bombings in Tokyo to raids on industrial centers like Nagoya and Osaka, were planned around the bomber's capabilities. Commanders praised its reliability and range, and it became clear that air power, rather than attrition alone, could bring the war to Japan's doorstep. In the post-war years, the B-29's legacy endured far beyond its combat record. Aviation engineers studied its design for decades, influencing the development of jet bombers, long-range reconnaissance aircraft, and even civilian airliners. Its high-altitude, long-range missions demonstrated that air superiority could reshape modern warfare. The Superfortress, once derided for its size and complexity, became a symbol of innovation overcoming skepticism, a testament to the vision of those who dared to build what others could not imagine. Even today, the lessons of the B-29 are studied in military academies worldwide. The interplay of engineering, strategy, and human courage that allowed a single aircraft to alter the course of a nation's history. Its missions over Tokyo remain a somber reminder of the destructive power of technology in war, balanced by the ingenuity and dedication of the people who wielded it. In the end, the B-29 did more than drop bombs. It redefined the very concept of strategic air power, humbling its skeptics and demonstrating that bold engineering, relentless preparation, and precise execution could achieve what many had thought impossible. The Japanese engineers who once laughed at its size came to understand a truth as stark as the firestorms it unleashed. In war, underestimating ingenuity is a peril no nation can afford. The sky over Tokyo had been conquered, not by brute force alone but by vision, precision, and a machine that seemed larger than life. The Superfortress was history in motion, a steel giant that etched its name into the annals of warfare, and a reminder that innovation, once dismissed, can change the world.